Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's webinar on the platypus. We're lucky enough to be joined here tonight with Jess Thomas from Zoos Victoria and Jane Petch from Melbourne Water. And my name is Madeline Taylor. So I'm the Waterwatch Coordinator at Melbourne Water, and so is Jane. I look after platypus and Jane looks after frog census. And yeah, as I said, Jess is from Zoos Victoria and she's the platypus keeper there. So should be a good presentation tonight. So firstly, I'd just like to say that our webinar is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri elders, past and present, and the elders and people from other communities who may be here today. So firstly, just some housekeeping. Tonight you'll hear from me first. I would be delivering a quick presentation on tips and tricks for platypus spotting. Then you'll hear from Jess, who will be giving us a presentation on platypus biology and behaviour. And then at the end, we'll have Q&A. So this session is being recorded and it will be added to the Melbourne Water's Expert Connections webinar playlist on YouTube for you to watch back later. We have disabled cameras and microphones for tonight, just to make sure the presentations run smoothly, but we do really want to hear from you. So please use the Q&A chat function and we'll answer all your questions at the end of the webinar. Great. So on to tips and tricks for platypus spotting during City Nature Challenge or any Citizen events. So firstly, what do platypus look like? What are you meant to be looking for? They are dark brown in colour with white underparts. They have a nice big broad bill and a paddle-like tail at the back there, which you can see. In Victoria, they're approximately 50 centimetres in length, but this size does vary depending on where you are in Australia. In Tasmania, they're a lot bigger. Further up north, they get a lot smaller. Platypus are rarely seen on land, so you will be looking for them in the water, and they do float low in the water, so you'll often see the top of their head and their back visible, sometimes also their tail. So 2 to 3 humps in the water. So here you can see one floating quite low in the water. You can just see the top of the head, the top of the back, and a bit of the tail there. So that's what you're generally looking for. Also, it's important to note that Ricali and platypus are very similar in appearance. So for those that don't know, Ricali is our native water rat. So the main distinguishing feature between the two species is their tail. So Ricali, here you can see in this photo, they have a really long, thin tail with a white tip at the end, versus a platypus, which has that broad paddle-like tail at the back. They do occupy similar habitats, which makes it hard sometimes. But if you are at the beach or a coastal environment, you're probably looking at a Ricali. Ricali are also often seen on land, while platypus, they do come onto land sometimes, but it's a little bit less common. So here's just some more photos here showing that nice long narrow tail with the white tip at the end of the Ricali. But of course, animals don't often perch nice and close for us to look at them. This is probably more likely what you're going to be looking at if you do try and go platypus spotting. So here, this one is a Ricali picture, but it is quite hard to tell if you're looking at a Ricali or a platypus because they do both float low in the water. So it's just a good idea if you are going platypus spotting to perhaps invest in some binoculars, stay for a while, observe the animal quietly, see what else it's doing. If it does come to land, maybe it's a Ricali, maybe you'll be fortunate enough to see its tail. So when to look for? Platypus are most active at dawn and dusk, so they're nocturnal, so this is the best times to come out and look for them. So at dusk, they're exiting their burrows to come out and feed, and at dawn, they're coming back to their burrows. So it's a good chance you'll see one then. Also the platypus monitoring season. So this is late summer to autumn. This is when the juveniles are leaving their burrows. So you might get lucky and see a juvenile. We also have spring is the mating season. So a good time to see is September. That's when we celebrate Platypus Month in Victoria. And then in the first week or two of October, the females are going to their burrows to lay their eggs. So best to see them before that happens. Where to look? So platypus occupy rivers, creeks, natural lakes, backwaters and billabongs, but they also are found in man-made structures as well. So dams, reservoirs, irrigation channels. They're a lot easier to spot in calm water rather than, fast-flowing water or riffles. So it's best to choose a place, an elevated spot with good visibility of downstream and upstream of the river or creek. And where to find them. So this is a map of Melbourne with the blue dots representing a platypus record. And this is just taken off Atlas of Living Australia. So here you can see in the Werribee catchment, they're found in the Werribee Gorge, also Lower Werribee River, Maribyrnong. We have them in Upper Deep Creek and Jackson's Creek. In the Yarra catchment, they're found in the Yarra River upstream of the Plenty River confluence and Alinda Creek. And in the Dandenong catchment, they can be found in Monbulk Creek, which is a really important population. And we also have them in the Western Port catchment too, so in Cardinia Creek, Bunyip Tarago River and Lang Lang River. And you can find out more information about these populations in our Healthy Waterways strategy as well. So just some tips on field methods. It's always good to go observe platypus with a partner because to safety, you are by a waterway. If you do have them, bring a torch or binocular. Don't forget to have a torch that has a red light setting. And observe quietly for at least 30 minutes by your chosen spot. Platypus can be quite shy and elusive. So yeah, this just increases your chance of seeing one. If you're sitting, roughly about 50 meters away from a waterway and elevated observation spot, you've probably got a good chance of seeing one if it's there. And choose a place that has a calm water, a deep pool along a river or creek. And if you have the time, it's great to visit the same sites regularly during the monitoring season, so you can be conducting those repeated visits. And if you do happen to find one, you can record your sighting on platypusSPOT. This is our website where we import all our citizen science sightings for platypus, and they will be validated by an ecologist. Cool. So I'll just be passing on to Dr. Jessica Thomas now, who's going to do a presentation on platypus biology and behaviour.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. I'll just
Thanks, Jess.
Jump over and share my screen. How's that looking?
Yeah, great.
All right. Sorry, I forgot to put it back at the start. Try one more time. Okay, there we go. So thanks, Maddie. Yeah, my name's Jess, and I'm the platypus specialist at Healesville Sanctuary. So I've actually been working here now for a little over 17 years, and I can't quite believe where all that time's gone. My job here is split between looking after the resident platypus that live here at the sanctuary and who you can come and visit every day. And I also do a lot of research and study the wild population that live in Corrandirt Creek, which is the stream that runs right through the heart of the sanctuary as well. So today I'm going to be talking to you a lot about platypus biology and platypus behaviour, and really just going through what the life of a platypus looks like. So how would you describe what a platypus is like? I'll pose that to you right now. You know, a lot of the common answers that I get are things like they're cryptic, they're shy, and they're elusive. But to be honest, that's not the animal that I see here every day. This is the animal that I see every day. This is one of our males, Milsom, and he's scratching his own back on that that log there, and having a bit of a chew on some food that he's picked up on the surface there. The animals that I see, they're very bold, they're very playful, they're inquisitive, they'll check anything out. They're hungry little eating machines. That's all they do is eat and eat. And they're also incredibly energetic, you know, for a lot of species, I guess, including us. You know, we'll do something and then we'll stop and have a rest. Platypus doesn't have a rest. They wake up, they hit the water, and they will swim around for anywhere between 8 and 16 hours every day, and they don't stop and rest. The only time they'll take that rest is when they're ready to go to sleep. Now, the platypus is what we call semi-aquatic, meaning they spend half their time in the water, and they're also semi-fossorial, which means spending half their time underground. And this is the kind of place that you might find a platypus out swimming in the water. And the main behaviours that they'll show out here are that feeding. They will only eat in the water. And it's also where they go through all of those breeding behaviours, which I'll go through a little bit later. The semi-fossorial part relates to their burrows. And this is actually one here. There's a small entrance just under that tree fern there. And I found this one just the other day as I was radio tracking one. And the burrow is a really important part for the platypus. They do spend half their life underground in one of these burrows. It's where they sleep and take shelter, and all of the platypus will do this. But most importantly, it's where life begins for them. They will create special burrows that are nesting burrows, and this is where the females lay the eggs and where the young will spend the first 4 months of their life. So the burrow is actually an essential part of their survival. Here are some examples of some other burrows that I just wanted to point out. So these are just resting burrows, and these are being used outside of the breeding season at the moment. This is a burrow here, and they're really common in these big log jams, you know, where you find those massive trees that have fallen across the river, and, you know, there's a lot of debris that accumulates around it. So much of the time, they will actually find a place to sleep up in the corner of that log jam there. And also there's another one here. You can see there's just a small fallen log there, and there was a platypus sleeping up under that about 2 weeks ago there, which looks like a great spot because the entrance is nicely concealed, so nothing's going to see it when it comes out. So to start off with today, I'll be talking about, I guess, the essence of life for a platypus, and that's diet and foraging for these little eating machines. So they're what we call a generalist carnivore, which means carnivore being a meat eater, and a generalist, they will eat anything. So this diagram here, I pinched off the Melbourne Water website, and it shows the macro invertebrates that you can find in most healthy streams, and this is largely what the platypus will eat on. Now, they don't really eat on the surface or in the water column through the middle there. They primarily feed right on the bottom. They will go up into the reeds there though, so things like those damselfly larvae and the dragonfly larvae. They'll eat those worms and aquatic snails, the bloodworms, which is a midge larvae. They'll eat those mussels, and even things like crayfish and glass shrimp, caddisfly larvae, all of these things that they can find on the bottom. Now, the way they locate their food is probably one of their most unique features. So they do have all the 5 senses that we have. They've got eyes, they've got ears, they can smell, they can taste, they can touch. But all of these senses, they really only use on land or on the surface of the water. So when they dive underwater, they shut down everything. So their eyes close, their ears close, their nostrils close, and that allows them to hone in on the senses in the bill. So this is a close-up of Milsom, who was the one upside down on his back a little bit earlier. And you can see all these little fine, tiny dots that are all over the surface there. So these are little pores, and they all have a nerve ending that's inside them. And there's 2 types of nerve endings or receptors that are in this bill here. So the first type is called an electroreceptor, And as the name suggests, it detects electricity underwater. They can detect it so weak, weaker than a battery, both in AC and in DC. And it essentially detects the electrical current that's in a heartbeat, if you think of it a bit that way. So that's one of the ways that they can pick up their prey under the water. The other type of receptor that they have in the bill is called a mechanoreceptor. And this has been likened to using touch, but from a distance, which it sounds a little bit complicated. But the mechanoreceptors detect things like vibrations and movement through the water column without actually having to touch it. So, and then both these receptors take the information and send it back to the brain, which forms an image of their underwater environment, which is how they don't swim into anything. And it's also how they're able to locate all of that food. So as they swim along underneath the water, they actually move their bill from side to side, going left to right, and that's them sort of testing the environment around them, looking for the differences in all of those signals. Now, as I said, they do prefer to feed right on the very bottom of any waterway, like you can see in this image here. Gravel's one of their favourites, or very small cobbles. And they use their bill as a bit of a shovel. They'll move it all around and then pick up all those little tiny invertebrates. And they store it in cheek pouches, which are just on the very side of the bill, inside their mouth. And they'll fill those up while they're underwater as much as they can. And then when they're full, they float right up to the surface. And this is where they're going to chew up that food. So on the surface, they're going to push all that food back into the mouth, where they grind it up on special plates that are inside their mouth. Now, the grinding plates, they grow just the same way that teeth do, like on us, but instead there's a series of hard ridges, and it really grinds that food up into a bit of a paste, and then that's when they're able to consume it. Now, the platypus has a very tiny stomach. Now, contrary to, I believe there's a quiz that circulates in the Age every now and again that says a platypus doesn't have a stomach. That's incorrect. They do have a stomach. It's a very small one. So it's because the mouth grinds the food up so finely, it means their stomach doesn't need to process the food the same way that ours does, for example. So the stomach will get full very quickly, but it also means they will get hungry very quickly. So if any of you live with somebody who's constantly going to the pantry every 10 minutes looking for a snack, that is exactly what a platypus is doing throughout their whole active period. So while they're on the surface there as well, they're having a bit of a chew. This is also where they can take a breath and then they'll head back down again. Now, platypus can actually dive 75 times every hour. So this is how energetic they are. And when they dive, they'll stay underwater for anywhere from 30 seconds at a short dive up to about 2 minutes. At most, they probably won't go past that too much. Then they'll come back up to the surface, and then they're only on the surface for maybe 10 to 15 seconds at best. So this is where you need to try and spot them. Now, they do have very high energy requirements. As you know, I've just explained, they're very active all the time, and all of their food is made up of very small macroinvertebrates. And through one of my research projects, I found that they ate 920 kilojoules per 1 kilo animal every day. And if you're wondering, well, how much is that? That's about 7 times as much food as you eat if you were the same size as a platypus. So it's actually a huge amount of food. It works out to be between 13 and 21% of their body weight just in food matter every single day. And the amount of food that they eat, it actually changes across the year. So in this graph here, you can see the different stages as it relates to the breeding season. So in the breeding season, which is the center column there, they actually didn't eat very much food compared to before and after that. Now, that's likely because they were very busy doing other things as it related to the breeding season. Beforehand, they needed to eat a lot more to get ready for the breeding season, and then afterwards, they're replenishing those resources. Now, if we look at what a year in the life of a platypus looks like, this is it. So I'm going to start the year off for them in May, and this is when everything starts through it and go right through till April. Now in the top row there, this is what the male does across the year. In the middle, we've got what the female does across the year. And then down at the very bottom, this is what the juveniles do. So the breeding season really starts off in May, and this is when testosterone starts to increase in the males. And this controls a lot of those breeding behaviours for him. And this is where they need to establish a territory. So the platypus is typically a solitary animal. They don't really like to live together. Normally they have a bit of an understanding with the other animals around them. You go over there, I'll go over here, and we'll just be okay with that. But as we head into the breeding season, the males decide that they're not okay with that, and they need to establish a territory that has female platypus that live within it. So this is where they start swimming up and down the river quite a bit. And they'll do that right up until they court and mate with the females in September and October. And then up until December, this is when their testosterone levels start to decrease. And then they pretty much spend the next 4 months just eating and replenishing those resources, because all they've done for the last few months is swim around looking for females. The female, however, has a different job. So as the males start to increase those territories and swim around a lot more, the females start to avoid the males. And I'll go through some of the different strategies that they use. Again, courtship and mating is in September and October. The female will then need to build that nesting burrow where she lays her eggs and then feeds her young milk up until February, when the young start to emerge and are weaned in March. This gives her April to herself before she has to start all over again. Now for the juveniles, once they emerge in March and they start to eat the adult diet of macroinvertebrates, they'll stay in their mum's territory, at least most of them do, at least for the first month. And if you're a female, you're going to hang around and you're going to continue to live in your mum's house, I guess, and eat all of her food. But if you're a male, you're actually going to disperse at some point within that year, and you're going to go and find somewhere else to live. Now I'm going to go through each of these different phases in a little bit more detail. So let's start with the males. Now the male platypus is venomous, a bit like a snake. So you can see some images of some spurs here. On the left, this is an adult male that lives in Coranderrk Creek. I actually caught him earlier this year. And you can see he's got a nice sharp spur there on his back foot. Now the spur is actually hollow down the centre, and it leads into a duct here, and then heads up into a reservoir, and there's a gland that sits just at the top of their leg. And so they produce venom very similar to how snakes produce venom, with the bulk of the venom being produced in around July and August. And they use these spurs as a weapon against other males. Now we think most of the time they don't actually get into fights with other males, because there's not really they know what's going to happen. But if you get two very big, strong males, that's when you are likely to get a fight over a territory. Now, outside of the breeding season, sort of in that December to April gap, males will actually overlap in territories. They're very tolerant of each other when they're not under that control of testosterone. But then as they head into the breeding season, that's when they actually separate out on those territories. Now this picture that I've got down the bottom here, you can see that this male spur is actually discoloured and it's a lot shorter. I caught this male a couple of years ago in Coranderrk Creek as well. And this is sort of what happens as the males get older and they've been in lots of fights. The spurs can wear down and they can sort of become a bit blunt, or they can break. So I actually think this is quite an old male that's still sort of hanging around in the area. Now for the females, as those males are setting up their territories, the females, they need to be evasive, and they've got a few different strategies that they'll use in order to avoid the males. The first one is avoidance, and they do that by reducing the amount of activity or the duration that they're actually awake. So they become very efficient and they wake up, they hit the water, they eat as much as they can in the shortest period of time, and then they'll actually go back underground into their burrow and try not to overlap with him too much. The other strategy that they use is that they might actually come out during the day. And I'm sure everybody's got a story about how they've seen a platypus out during the day. And we see this not only with our animals here, but it's also been found down at Lake Lee in Tasmania, where they actually found that during that pre-breeding phase, they found a lot of females were out during the day and weren't quite sure why, but this is likely one of the scenarios. So over here, you can see the 24 hours of a day, and the blue bars there, this is the activity of the male, and this is in our captive breeding program that we have here. You can see he's very strictly nocturnal. There's no chance of him being up during the day. Sunset, up he gets, and then sunrise, he's back in bed very consistently. The orange and yellow bars are the behaviour of the females, and what you can see is that the females chose to become diurnal up until about lunchtime. So they skewed their activity from nocturnal just to try and avoid overlapping with the male too much. And this gave them a better opportunity to feed while he was asleep. Now, the other strategy that they use is flight. And this is, as you probably imagine, it's where they just run away if they see him. So often the male will enter a particular space, the female will see him, and she will just dive under the water and flee and run out and go into another pond. A very effective strategy, and this happens quite a lot in that pre-breeding phase. Tends to start quite a few weeks before courtship will begin, and what she's doing here is she's starting to overlap her activity with his, just so that he knows that she's around. And the other strategy they use to keep themselves safe is resistance. So what we also see is that all the courtship and breeding behaviours that the pair will go through, 80% of all those encounters were actually ended by the female, with her choosing to leave the encounter first. So as you can imagine, having a male that is venomous, while he's unlikely to use it on a female, she does need to be very careful to keep herself safe that she doesn't become injured during any encounter with him. Now we will head into the next phase of the breeding season, which is courtship. So courtship is something that all species go through, whether you're a mammal or a bird or even an insect. And it's a process where two animals can get to know each other. It's a process of assessing different qualities in their mate. Now, I'm not actually sure what the platypus is assessing in each other through their courtship process, but they seem to be assessing something. And this picture here, this shiny animal here, this is the boy. And then the one that's lost a lot of her guard hairs here on the top, this is the female. And what they do is they bite the very tips of each other's tails and they swim around in a circle joined together on the surface of the water. Now I've got some videos of this for you. So over here on the left, this is our female Yami and our male Wally, and they're biting each other's tails and swimming around that stick there, using it a bit like a maypole, I guess. Round and round and round. They invest so much time in these courtship behaviours. It'll happen sort of over at least a month or so. And then over here, this is another sort of, I call it a dance. And you can see the female's doing barrel rolls there, and she's leading the male. He's holding onto her tail and she's barrel rolling around, leading him through the water. So these are the two sorts of courtship behaviours that you're likely to see, and they'll spend most of the night going through these different behaviours. Then we'll move on to the creation of the nest, the essence of life for a platypus. This is our female Yami collecting some nesting material in her tail, and I've got some videos of this to show you. So the nesting burrow is really important for a platypus. So they don't have a pouch like an echidna does that will carry its egg around with it. And this is likely because the platypus needs to swim in the water. It's very cold. Their young need to breathe air. So it's really not practical to take your baby with you. So instead, the nesting burrow needs to function the same way that a pouch does in a marsupial, which means it needs to have the right temperature and the right humidity, at least, to keep that very young baby nice and safe. So here are a couple of examples of nesting burrows that I've excavated here after the female and the young were finished with them. Now, nesting burrows, as you can see, are very complex structures. They're a lot more detailed than a normal resting burrow that may only be 1 metre in length. They weave all around in a circle, so you can see those circles there on either side. That was the nesting chamber where the baby was. They can have one entrance, or they might have multiple entrances. And they have these things, you can see here in the centre, we've got a couple of dead ends that back onto each other. So these are called pugs. And it's actually where the platypus comes through and then backfills the soil behind her, sort of creating a dead end, and then she'll keep going into the chamber with the baby. And we think there's probably a couple of functions for having these pugs within that chamber. It stops other platypus getting in there. It stops predators getting in there, and it might provide some mitigation against flood waters as well. It also, as the baby gets a bit older, probably stops them from leaving the burrow too early. And this image here is just an example of the entrance of a nesting burrow. So it's quite a small opening, and usually find the difference in this opening compared to a resting burrow, because the males are larger than the females. By making the opening only the size of the female, it usually means that the males are too big to sort of fit into that burrow as well. Now, this is an example of how nesting material is collected. So I'll start playing that. So this is the platypus here. This is all the nesting material I've given her, grasses and leaves, and there's mat rush there and some bark. This is her tail, and she's very ambitious there. Collecting it in her bill and passing it under her body into her tail as she swims around. So this wet vegetation is really important because it's going to maintain the humidity within the nest, as also provide a nice safe space. Now, the female will spend anywhere between sort of 3 and 5 days collecting this material and taking it underground into that nesting burrow. And then this is her entering, the space where the dirt is. You can see her carrying a load of grasses there in her tail. And then she gets into the nest itself, and she has to weave this structure here that you can see on the right. So I guess it's a little bit similar to a possum dray. And there's a variety of layers there. Those rush grasses are all sewed together, woven around perfectly. She's used some finer poas to sort of hold it together. And then on the inside, there's usually a layer of leaves or bark, and that's where she will sit with them, and also where she'll leave the young when she needs to pop out to feed. So these are a couple of eggs that we had here that didn't hatch. So this was a year we were unsuccessful breeding. So 2 were laid in this time, and they're stuck together. Now that's just a set of normal tweezers there, just for a reference size. So they're only about the size of your thumbnail, so they're quite small. And the shell on the outside, it isn't hard like a chicken's egg. It's actually soft and leathery like a reptile's egg. And then the embryo grows and develops inside. We think they incubate the egg for about 10 days, and that's largely based off some of the behaviour that we see in the animals, but also based off what happens in the echidna. Now, for a lot of species, we've known some of the very basics of their biology, like this stuff, for more than 100 years. But still, nobody to this day has ever seen a platypus lay an egg. Like, we know they lay eggs, but nobody's ever seen it. Nobody's ever seen a platypus egg hatch either. And that's largely, I think, just because they're so well concealed. Now, this here is some of the data from my PhD studying the behaviour of our breeding female here and how much time she spent active in the water versus time in the nest. So the black bars indicate when she was underground in the nest, and then any of the gaps there, you can see she wasn't there. Across the top, we've got what she did when she only had one baby, and then across the bottom is when she had twins. Now, if we look at the first month, you can see she actually doesn't come out very much at all. So she's laid her egg in this time, and she's staying in there just feeding that tiny little jelly bean sized baby platypus her milk. And because it's so small and very underdeveloped, they look very similar to, you know, a baby kangaroo. When they first hatch, they kind of have a decent sized mouth and digestive tract and tiny little arms, but otherwise they haven't developed very far past that. And then after about the first month, for the next couple of months, she resumes her normal activity cycle. So she's coming out to feed herself for 8 to 10 hours. And one of the differences that I saw was when she had twins, she started to leave them alone and only feed them every second day quite early, from about 45 days, compared to when she only had one baby. She actually stayed with it a lot longer. And I'm not sure why this is. Maybe she needed to stay with the single one to keep it warm a little bit more, whereas the twins had each other. And then in that sort of final month of lactation, which is sort of February-ish, the babies only need to be fed every second day up towards the end there. Now, if you thought how much a platypus that wasn't breeding ate a lot of food, if you're a female platypus and you've got some babies and you're producing milk for them, will you eat even more food? So along here, we've got the 4 months of lactation. So say this is November, December, January, February. The blue bar is the lactating female and how much food she was eating every day. And then the yellow bar is a female from the same time who didn't have any babies. And so what you can see in the first month, when the breeding female is underground with her babies, she's not eating as much, but that's to be expected. But then once we head into the second, third, and even the 4th month, you can see that by the 4th month, she's eating almost double what a non-breeding female would be eating at the same time of year, which equals about 36% of her body weight every single day worth of food. So for a platypus to breed, the macroinvertebrate population within their stream, it needs to be very productive. Otherwise, there's not going to be enough food to feed that breeding female. Now, how quickly do the babies grow in the nest? Very quickly. So this is some burrow footage from 2016 here, where we had twin males. So if you look up the back here, I'm told this is a little bit like looking at somebody's ultrasound picture. So I can see them very clearly, but I think other people look at it and go, I'm not sure. There's the bill. There's these little white patches there. I think his eyes are still closed at this point. Really thin, fine hair, and he's curled up. That's his brother's back foot there. So this one here is resting his head on his brother. He's about to kick him in the head by the looks of it. And that's a little yawn there. So this is at about 80 days of age, or 2.5 months. So in that short period of time, they've gone from a tiny little jelly bean up to a baby platypus that's reasonably well developed at this side. They spend a lot of time sleeping while they're in their nest. But the other thing you can see here is that a lot of that nesting material has actually broken down. It's decomposed over those 2 months. And if you look at the size of the babies here, they really don't need it anymore because they've already started to grow their own fur. And now if we jump ahead to, this is 4 months, this is 127 days of age. So this little guy here, he's about to emerge. He's about to be weaned and take his first swim in the river. He's very active now. You can see he's chewing on some of his nesting material there. But you can see there, compared to the last video, the bill is a lot bigger, the fur's got a lot thicker, and the eyes are open now. And I have 100 more videos of these. It was very hard just to pick a couple. Now the the babies emerge from that nesting burrow at about 128 days of age, so that's about 4 months. They're also weaned at about the same time. So for a lot of species, young are weaned very gradually. They transition very slowly from a milk-based diet onto the adult diet. Not if you're a platypus. It happens at the same time. So you go one day from drinking milk to the next day you're out in the water and you have to find your own bugs. And what I found in all the times that we've bred them here is that 60% of all the nestlings, they were actually weaned prior to emerging from the burrow and taking a swim. 7 out of the 10 that I studied, they just emerged on their own and took themselves out into the water. But 3 were actually forcibly pushed out by their mother, which I watched on the camera as she went into the nest, and then she started to collapse the burrow in behind the juvenile until he popped out onto the surface, and then she closed the entrance in behind him, sort of sealing herself underground and pushing him out into the water. So I think she was sort of doing the equivalent of changing the locks there, but it seemed to be effective. Now, the size of these babies, they've grown from that tiny little jelly bean into a juvenile platypus that's actually almost the same size as their mum. So all the ones we bred here, they're about 72% of the weight of the mother, and that's the range there. I even had one male that emerged and he was heavier than what she was. He was huge. Now, if you go back to what I was telling you about how much food a female platypus needs to eat, you can see why now. So she's trying to feed, up to 2 baby platypus that are the same size that she is, just on her milk. So you can see why she needs to eat so much food. And I couldn't resist adding one more baby platypus video. So this is actually from a different year. This is a female storm, and she's in a bit of a milk coma there. So after they have a big drink, they just sort of, they need a good sleep, and so they roll upside down. And this is her mum here cleaning her bill for her. So that's mum, and she's rubbing her bill all over the baby's bill, cleaning up any milk residue. Kind of looks like she's sitting on the baby there, but the baby's fine now. She's Storm's 5 years old now, but they're always quite funny after they have a big drink of milk. They can't really do much. They just sit there. Now we're heading up to the time of year when those juveniles have just emerged into the adult population. So they're weaned off their milk. And this is a study that was done in 2022 and has looked at the home range or the spatial use of 3 adult females and 3 juveniles in Coranderrk Creek. So these sort of yellowy brown colours are the 3 juveniles where they use the creek, and you can see they overlap a little bit, but not too much. And then these 3 blue colours are 3 different adult females that were also captured at the same time. And you can see they overlap quite a bit. Now, at the time that we were tracking them, I thought, oh, this baby yellow and adult dark blue, they were in the same pond feeding every night. Surely they must be mum and baby. Maybe mums actually look after the babies a little bit more once they come out of that nesting burrow. It makes sense that they would. So I had the genetics sent away to see who's my mum and who's my dad. And I got the results back. So this brown female and this orange juvenile actually didn't capture either mum or dad. So I don't know who their parents are. But yellows, I found who her mum was. And it's actually this middle blue colour here. It wasn't the dark blue one. So that's mum and that's baby. They do overlap, but not significantly. And then the only other relative that we had here is this blue one here, and she is the cousin, sorry. She is the cousin of the yellow one. It gets very convoluted with who's dad and who's mum, and because the females stay in the same area, there's often some complex relationships there. So you can see that the cousin actually had a bit of an overlap with this juvenile's range. And surprisingly to me, this adult female here, she wasn't related to any of these study animals here. But it also showed me that an adult female was very tolerant of somebody else's baby feeding in the same space that she was, which opened up some interesting insights into their social dynamics. As for the behaviour of the juveniles, as I mentioned, there's a sex bias dispersal. So that means that all the adult males that have come into an area, they've come in from another catchment or another creek from somewhere else. They weren't born there. Whereas the females tend to stay in the area that they're born and stay in that natal home range, and they'll go on to breed in that space because all of the males that have come in are unrelated to them. This is a strategy that a lot of different species will use, and it's a method of maintaining reasonably good genetic diversity. Now, juvenile platypuses are actually, they're little sponges as soon as they come out of that nesting burrow. You know, if you consider that they've lived in this really sensory deprived environment for the first 4 months of their life, like just a little dark hole, they go out into the world and there's weather, there's water, there's day and night. They haven't been exposed to any of that for the first 4 months of their life. So they're really they're taking in so much information. They instinctively know how to feed and find their own food, which is just incredible. And they're also able to find their own shelter in a limited capacity. So I studied the behaviour of the juveniles in the local creek here. And out of the 7 juveniles that I radio tracked over about 3 months, they used 74 different burrows between them. So they sort of averaged 11 different burrows. Now, the majority of those burrows, they only used for a single occasion. It seemed to be a bit of a learning strategy, and they wound up in the weirdest places. Stormwater drains were very popular. I can see that's an easy option for them. They were sometimes just under grasses or under logs. They were behind those big rocky boulders that we used to support the banks of creeks. They were quite often in behind them. They used other platypus's burrows as well. So I don't actually think the juveniles were creating their own. They're actually just using other structures that they could find. I think that's probably a behaviour that actually comes a little bit later for them. We also found that the juveniles used sort of a larger home range than the adult females. So they're likely exploring the environment and getting a feel for where everything is. And their burrows were also spread over a really large range. So this map here, you can see this squiggly line here, that's the creek. The big circles are a burrow that's used quite a lot, and then these small circles are a burrow that was just used once. And so you can see how close together all these different burrows are. So this is just Healesville Sanctuary through here. This is the Coronderk, and then this is a residential area up through here. And then these random little spots here is there was one little male. He went and slept in the wetlands aviary. He went up through a stormwater drain, slept in the wetlands aviary one night, and then he popped out the other side and slept in an open drain at the back of the koala picnic lawn. And then he came back into the creek again. This is another stormwater drain that an animal followed. And this is actually the platypus exhibit here. One followed up an open drainage channel and had a bit of a forage under the deck there where we have this little artificial creek. So the juveniles will end up in all sorts of weird places. So bringing it back, we've been through the pre-breeding season, the breeding season, and the different courtship and mating behaviours, how the nest is constructed and how the female looks after the babies, and then how the juveniles emerge here, leaving poor old mum with just April to herself before starting again. Now, having a look at this, it's probably not surprising to see that females don't breed every year. We're not sure why they may not breed every year, but when you look at how much effort goes into just raising 1 or 2 babies in a single year, you can see why she might need some time to replenish her resources, and so to make sure there's also enough food for any females that are now staying in the area, but also for anyone else that's breeding in the next season. Now, finally, tonight, I'm just going to finish off with some longevity. So we're talking about the life of the platypus. Now, some of the most common mortality factors that we see, particularly here through the Australian Wildlife Health Centre, but also through a study that we did recently with the Australian Platypus Conservancy, looking at records, drowning in Opera House yabby nets, and getting entangled in fishing line and fishing hooks are really common injuries. We had one come in, I think it was last year, just from up in Jamison in Victoria there, and she had a fishing hook through the front shield on her bill, and we were able to remove that, but she needed some hospitalisation for a couple of weeks before we released her back to the wild. Litter is really common, things like string, hair ties, elastic bands wrapped around their bodies, really common. Predation by foxes is also quite common, and even there's an increasing trend. We've had 3 in the last 12 months brought in here, where a platypus had actually been killed by a dog, and these aren't feral dogs, they're from residential areas. So it seems that people's pet dogs have actually gone into the creek and killed the platypus, and then sort of going back, and I would not be surprised if the owner had no idea that this has happened. So I guess just on this note, if you are a dog owner, you know, before you let your dog out into the creek, just have a bit of a look around to see if you can see a platypus, and even keeping them on a lead, particularly around dawn and dusk when they are likely to be active, you might actually be really helping out these beautiful animals. Now, we're unsure what the average age of a platypus is, because they're very hard to survey for. You have to catch one as a juvenile to know how old it is. Now, the oldest animal ever caught in the wild was 24 years old, and that was recently, only a couple of years ago. The oldest lactating female was 21 years old, and that was a while ago now, up at the Shoalhaven River in New South Wales. But the oldest animal on record ever is one of our girls here, and she's over here. I've got a video of her. She lives here, and in October this year, she's going to hit 32 years old. And, she was old when I started, and I can't believe that she's still with us. She's a little bit blind and a little bit deaf, but that doesn't really impact her life in any way. She still finds her own food. She's on display every day. And this is her sitting on one of her favourite logs under the waterfall, grooming her fur. She's a very beautiful girl. And she also has the burrow that's the longest out of every animal, and she still manages to go all the way back there every night. She doesn't have any arthritis that our vets have seen, so she's doing really well, and she can still scratch her head with her back foot. And that is all that I have for you tonight. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Jess. That was wonderful. I really enjoyed that footage, and I hope everyone else did. Very special to see that. Wonderful. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to pop them in the Q&A chat. This is the time to have your burning questions answered. But also, we have our email address here if you have questions that you'd like to send later on, or if you would like some further information on our programs or what we do. And the QR code there is just a link to our feedback survey, so you can provide some feedback on this webinar tonight so we can improve our events for future. So yeah.
So far we have one question from Trish. She says, I have heard it was recently discovered that they are biofluorescent under ultraviolet light. Has it been figured out why this happens?
That's a great question, and wish I knew the answer to that. We actually conducted our own study here, which we're writing up for publication at the moment. And originally they found this in some museum specimens in the US. So we repeated it over here on the animals that live here. But what we found is that they actually only biofluoresced when they were wet in the water. It seemed to be the angle of the fur or something like that. And we're not really sure why it is. Some people think it's just a residual trait that's just been genetically carried through and no longer has a function. But I actually wonder whether it's a method that they can use to actually see each other out in the wild, maybe a way to identify a mate potentially. So we know that they can see colour, and it's skewed to more the short wavelengths, so like the blues and the greens. And the UVA, that's also a short wavelength light. So it's sort of around that sort of color spectrum. We know there's reptiles that can see it. So I think it's not out of the question that they can actually use it as a way to see each other.
Thanks for that. So we also have a question about what is the name of that older female that you just spoke about, the 32-year-old. What's her name?
Her name's Flay, which seems very fitting. So she was named after David Flay, who was one of our first, I guess, employees here at Healesville Sanctuary, and he was the first person to breed the platypus in captivity. So it seems only fitting that she seems to be the oldest one, and she has his name.
Lovely. And how do the babies suckle, and how old is the female when sexually mature?
So for the males, we think we know they can start breeding at about 2, whether or not they have the opportunity or not with older males around. For a female, it seems to be about 3 or 4 is when they're first able to breed. The way they suckle up that milk is very messy. So the female platypus doesn't have any teats on her belly. So the young I guess, snuffle around on her belly, and it comes out, I always think of it a little bit like it comes out like sweat does on us. The female can also help to stimulate that milk by grooming her own fur around those mammary glands to get a little bit of the liquid out and get it going. But it's this very messy process. I've hand raised some platypus nestlings before, and I end up covered in as much of the milk as what they do. So I don't know how, it always amazes me how they manage to ingest it.
So interesting. And that's all the questions we have.
I think we had a couple more. Sorry, Jane.
Oh.
We had some questions about the burrows. So how long are the burrows, the nesting and the breeding ones? And are the burrows impacted by flooding along the river? And can this lead to the drowning of young?
Yeah, so nesting burrows, they can range sort of from as short as, I guess, maybe 3 or 4 meters up to about 10 meters. I mean, that's at least in my experience of the ones that I've excavated. But they, of course, they weave around in different circles. And even one I dug up last year from Yami, when she wasn't successful, she'd done like a double layer thing. So she'd come in and then she'd gone back around and underneath the tunnel itself. It was more than what I thought she was capable of doing. I was very proud of her. But yeah, flooding is a big concern, particularly over summer when there are these nesting burrows around. So for the most part, across the platypus's range, when they breed, it's our driest time of year. So the risk of flooding is it's meant to be fairly low. But in a lot of regulated river systems, there's a spring flush. And so that will actually create a flood event. And so one thing that a lot of researchers are starting to look into at the moment is have the platypus adapted to those artificial spring flushes, and are they digging them higher up the bank and further away to protect them, or are they actually being impacted by those flood waters? So it's a really good question. And when we have that sort of I guess, less characteristic seasons and have like really wet springs and early summers, it's certainly a big concern.
Thanks, Jess. And maybe just one last question to finish on tonight. I feel like this is a good one to finish on because you did touch on it. What things can we do as individuals to help the platypus?
Yeah, great question. The things like the water regulation and things like that's out of the control of most individuals. The best thing you can do, and the big campaign I'm on at the moment, is for dog owners, please walk your dog on a lead, particularly around dawn and dusk. Just check the river before you let your dog in to have a swim or a play, and keep an eye on them, like watch them the whole time. You know, you don't need to limit your dog's activity. You can still take your dog out and do these fun things, but just be a little bit more vigilant about it. The other one that always gets me is you know, the litter and the fishing waste. You know, I find hair ties in the supermarket car park all the time. I don't know why people drop hair ties in the Coles car park all the time. It's a weird place, I think. But you know, if you see those little things, just they do wash into the stormwater drains, and that's how they end up in the creek. So just if you see it, pick it up, cut it, pop it in the bin. Particularly those things like elastic bands and hair ties. That'll, you know, it'll really help out a lot of species.
Wonderful. Well, we'll finish up there, everyone, because we're a little bit past 7 now. So if you do have any other burning questions, we do have our Waterwatch email address there. We can hopefully pass those on to Jess at a later date. But yeah, I'd just like to say a big thank you, Jess, for coming here tonight. It was wonderful to hear from you and see some of that amazing footage and learn so much about the platypus and their biology and behaviour. And yeah, thank you so much, Jane, as well, for helping manage the webinar tonight. I really appreciate it. And everyone else for attending. Thank you for coming here tonight and taking the time to learn more about such an amazing animal. So yeah, we hope you enjoyed it and look forward to holding more in the future. Thank you, everyone.